Episode 1. The first funeral. She dreamed her own funeral, but something was wrong with it. Not just the way the sky hung too low, or how the crows didn't caw, only watched. It was the dress. They dressed her in white, lace sleeves, buttons down the back. Not black, not the navy blue her mother always said she looked restful in. White, like a wedding, or a sacrifice. In the dream, she wasn't inside the coffin. She was beside it, standing, watching, silent. The mourners passed her without a glance. None of them asked who she was. None of them noticed her lips mouthing the words they were too afraid to speak. She didn't cry. She couldn't, because every time she tried, her tears turned into ash. Her mother placed a hand on the coffin, not gently, not lovingly, almost like she was steadying it, like the box might move. She was never meant to last, her mother said, and the others nodded. All of them, even the man with the hollow eyes who stood in the back and whispered the name. Ines. That was her name. That was her name. Wasn't it? She woke up choking, not from fear, from flowers, the scent of lilies in her throat. Heavy, sticky, sweet in the wrong way. Her bed sheets were damp, her hands covered in soil, and on her pillow, a single white button, still warm. Later that morning, she passed the town's funeral home. A small cracked sign, painted glass, curtains always drawn. But today, the door was open. Inside, silence. And on the wall beside the registered desk, a chalkboard, in memoriam, Ines M. She stared at it, long enough to forget how to breathe. That was her name, exactly her name. But there was no date, no service time, just a name. And under it, a line etched deeper than the chalk. Bring no flowers. She won't recognize them. Episode 2. Nobody brought flowers. It was supposed to be a quiet service. Just family, maybe some neighbors, a priest with a short memory, and a longer sermon. But Ines noticed at the moment she stepped into the chapel. No one brought flowers. Not a single bouquet. Not a wreath. Not even a wild daisy plucked on the way there. Just a coffin. Just the mourners. Just silence. Her abuela deserved more. She was the kind of woman who outlived everyone's expectations and buried half the town with her own hands. She always said, "When I go, let the flowers speak louder than the priest." But today, the priest spoke alone. The air smelled of dust, not petals, and every eye was dry. Ines sat in the third row, second seat from the right, the same place she stood in her dream, except now her body was solid, her breath real, but the room felt exactly the same. Too still, too staged, like someone had already seen it and was simply reenacting it. She looked to the far left pew, the one behind the pillar, and there he was, the man from her dream. Hollow eyes, no expression, just watching her. And when their eyes met, he nodded, once, like someone checking a box. After the service, Ines approached her mother. "Where are the flowers?" Her mother blinked, tightened her lips, then glanced toward the doors. "No one remembered," she said. "Strange, isn't it?" Ines shook her head. "No. What's strange is that I dreamed this 2 nights ago. And the coffin looked exactly like that. And the priest wore the same shoes. And no one brought flowers." Her mother went pale, not from fear, from recognition, like someone who just remembered a nightmare she swore wasn't real. "Ines, this isn't the first time you've dreamed this. When you were 6, you told me my funeral would have no flowers either. And I laughed, until I found a lily on my pillow the next day, still wet. That night, Ines lay in bed, holding the button she found after her first dream. It was still warm, still whispering something she couldn't quite hear, unless she pressed it against her chest. And when she finally did, she didn't hear a voice. She heard a door opening, somewhere underground, somewhere familiar, outside her window. A crow landed on the sill. It didn't caw. It dropped something, a stem, still green, still bleeding sap. No bloom, just the flower that should have been, but wasn't. Episode 3. The girl in my coffin was still breathing. In the dream, the coffin was open. That was new. Usually it was closed, sealed, safe. But this time, the lid was pulled back, and she was looking at herself. Not from the side, not from above, from the end of the aisle, where the air was thick with something unsaid. And there she was, laid in lace, hands crossed, face still, but not cold, not dead. She watched the chest rise, barely, almost imperceptible, like a breath that wasn't supposed to escape. But it did. It kept doing it. A slow inhale, a slower exhale, as if the body was practicing for a life it never got to live. She walked closer, every step echoing in silence too heavy for grief. No one turned. No one noticed, because they were watching the wrong Ines. They were watching the one in the box. She leaned over, face to face with her own closed eyes. And then they opened, wide, not startled, aware, like they'd been waiting for her. The lips didn't move, but the voice came anyway, from her own mouth, from beneath the earth. You were never meant to stand there. You were meant to lie still. I've been breathing for both of us. Ines stumbled back. The floor beneath her cracked, but only in the dream. She woke up gasping, heart pounding, sheets damp, nails clenched so tight her palms bled, and on her pillow, a white glove, too small, too delicate, and inside it, a fingerprint, pressed in dust. Her own. Later that day, she visited the funeral home again. No name on the board, but the chalk tray was missing. Only one message scratched into the paint. Do not open what still listens. She asked the mortician if they'd ever left the coffin unsealed. He looked up, paused. Only once, he said, and we regretted it. The girl, she was breathing, but the town called it a dream. Because who would bury a girl who hadn't finished her first breath? Ines walked home slower that night, not because of the dream, but because her lungs felt used, like someone else had borrowed them, and just before sleep took her again. She touched her chest, felt it rise, felt it fall, but somewhere beneath that rhythm, there was another beat, not hers, but nearby, like a second heart, still learning how to lie still. Episode 4, I was at my own wake and I wasn't invited. The dream began with laughter, soft, muffled, like it was happening behind a closed door. Ines stood in a hallway she didn't recognize. Dark wallpaper, faded photos, a light bulb flickering like it hadn't been looked at in years. She followed the sound. Slow steps, bare feet. The door opened before she touched it. Inside, a room full of people. Candlelight, chairs in a circle. A framed photo at the center. Her face, smiling, frozen. It was awake. Her wake, but no one seemed sad. They chatted, passed cups, whispered stories she couldn't hear. She walked in. No one turned. No one stopped, not even when she stood between them and her own photograph. "Excuse me," she said. No answer. "I'm here." Nothing. She waved, stepped in front of her mother. Still nothing. She looked down. Her dress wasn't white this time. It was black, but not morning black. It looked burned, singed at the hem, ash trailing behind her with every step. On the table beside the candles, a guest book. She leaned in. Names. So many names. People she recognized, people she didn't. But the last line stopped her cold. Ines M. declined attendance. She tried to rip the page. Her fingers went through it, like smoke, like she was already gone, but hadn't been given permission to leave. Across the room, someone laughed louder. She turned. It was a child, 6, maybe 7, curly hair, wide eyes. He stared at her, really stared, and whispered, "You're standing where I'm supposed to be." She backed away. The child grinned and pointed at the photo. The image of her blinked once, quick, but she saw it. And when she looked again, the photo had changed. It wasn't her anymore. Not exactly. Same face, different expression, and underneath a new plaque, remembered for being almost real. She woke up sitting, not lying, still dressed, hands folded on her lap like she'd been posed, and on the nightstand, a guest book identical to the one in the dream, except this time, it had only one name inside, written in perfect cursive. Not hers, but familiar. Ines M. Observed but never entered. Episode 5. He called me Oam. The dream opened in a playground. Empty, silent, swaying gently without wind. Ines stood alone by the slide, her hand stained with something that looked like chalk, but felt like bone dust. A child laughed. She turned. There he was, maybe 5 years old, red shirt, shoes untied, running toward her with arms open. Mom! She froze. Her breath caught mid-inhale. The kind of breath you take when someone calls you something you didn't know you were. I knew you'd come, he said, wrapping his small arms around her waist. His warmth was real, his weight light but grounding, and for a moment, she let herself believe it, that this was hers, that he was. She looked down at him. What's your name? He pulled back just enough to look at her, grinning. You said I didn't need one, because I came from your last breath. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from recognition, a kind that came from beneath the skin, from the marrow, from the place memories are planted before birth. She sat on the edge of the sandbox. He curled into her lap like a memory trying to find shape. You died holding me, he whispered, but they buried you somewhere else. The sky above them shifted, bright to bruised, and in the distance, the bell from the funeral home rang. Once, twice, then stopped, like someone had changed their mind mid-sentence. Where did I die, she asked. In the place with no mirrors, he said. The place where they take away your face and give it to someone new. She looked at her hands. They were smaller now, familiar, but not hers. The lines in her palm were wrong. The scar on her left thumb, gone. She wasn't just dreaming. She was wearing someone else's ending. The child reached into his pocket, pulled out a necklace, a locket, tarnished, beaten. He opened it. Inside, a photo of her holding him, in a dress she never owned, in a room she never entered. And yet, she remembered the moment the photo was taken. She remembered the weight of him in her arms, the smell of his hair, the sound of his heartbeat next to hers. You're not supposed to be back yet, he said. They haven't rewritten the others. She stood, dizzy. The playground spun. The sand beneath her feet felt deeper than it should. Am I dead? No, the boy said. You're what they buried to keep the real you alive. She woke up gasping. In her lap, a red string, tied into a bracelet. The kind you'd wrap around a child's wrist to keep him from getting lost. And in her pocket, a photo, old, creased, her, holding a child she doesn't remember giving birth to. But her smile in the photo was real. Episode 6. The last nail wasn't wood. In the dream, she stood at the edge of a coffin. This time, she wasn't watching. She was working, a hammer in one hand, a nail in the other. Except the nail wasn't wood. It gleamed, dark, heavy, too long for a coffin, too cold for earth. It pulsed once in her hand, like it had a heartbeat, like it knew. She looked down at the body inside. It was hers, again, but different. Eyes open but soft, like the body had accepted what the living still couldn't name. And the mouth, stitched shut with thread made of hair. She hesitated, raised the hammer, but before she brought it down, she whispered, "Why this nail?" And the voice from beneath the lid answered, "Because we forgets, but metal remembers." She woke up sitting upright, the blanket wrapped tight around her like a shroud. On the nightstand, a nail, real, heavy, blackened like it had been pulled from fire, and etched along the shaft, "Do not seal what still sings." That morning, she went back to the funeral home, not to visit, to search. The place was too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after something has already screamed. She found the staircase behind the office. Locked. Rusty. But her hand fit the knob like it had turned it before. The basement was colder than it should have been. Not damp. Not moldy. Just emptied. As if someone had removed time from the room and left only the waiting. In the far corner, beneath a tarp, a coffin, unmarked, unburied, and beside it, a box of nails. Not wood, metal, exactly like the one from her dream. She stepped closer, heart pounding so hard it echoed in her palms. Inside the box, one nail was missing, the exact size, the exact weight, as if someone had already started sealing something and stopped halfway. She touched the coffin lid. It was warm, and from inside the faintest thud, not loud, not angry, just rhythmic, like a knock, like a memory, trying to be let out. She backed away, fell to her knees, and when she looked up, the nameplate on the wall behind the coffin had changed. It now read, Ines M. Interred, never. Contained, ongoing. Episode 7, No One Remembers I Died. She started asking questions, not in whispers, not in riddles, straightforward, as if naming the silence might make it crack. First, her best friend Clara, over coffee, normal day, sunlight too bright for what needed to be said. Do you remember when I died? Clara blinked, laughed nervously. What? Just humor me. Ines said, was there ever a time when I wasn't here? Clara stirred her coffee. Too long. You move away for a bit, she said. Senior year, maybe? But you came back. No, Ines whispered. Not moved. Gone. Silence. And then Clara said something that made her chest tighten. I don't think you've ever really been gone. You're just sometimes hard to find. Next, her cousin Mateo. He worked at the archive, the town records. Everything ever lived or died, kept in rows of drawers older than the church. She gave him her full name, date of birth, and the night she dreamed her first funeral. He searched. Nothing. There's no record, he said, of you dying, or even being missing. He looked up, but oddly, there's no birth certificate either. She left without another word, her hands shaking, heart drumming in a rhythm she no longer recognized as hers. That night, she found an old photo album in her mother's closet, one she wasn't supposed to touch. She opened it. Every photo of her as a child. Her face was slightly blurred. Just hers. Everyone else, sharp, smiling, still, but Ines moved, like she was never meant to stay still long enough to be remembered. She flipped to the last page. A handwritten note. If found wandering, do not ask her name. Let her pass. She forgets on purpose. The next morning, she returned to the funeral home, asked to see the death registry. The director hesitated, then handed her a leather-bound book. Inside names, dates, causes. She turned to the M section. No Ines, but tucked between pages. A loose slip, unlabeled, and on it, Ines M. witnessed her own funeral. Entry denied to public memory. She stared at it for a long time, long enough for the ink to blur, and when she finally looked up, there was a mirror across the room. She hadn't seen it before, and in the reflection, she wasn't there. Episode 8, The Ones Who Watched Me Die. They were always in the dreams, in the back rows, the corners, shadowed, silent. Their eyes never left her. Not when she lay in the coffin. Not when she stood beside it. They didn't mourn. They watched, like guards, like readers waiting for the final page. She never saw their faces clearly, just outlines. Silhouettes that breathed like animals behind glass. Until the day she saw one at the pharmacy. He stood by the cold medicine aisle. Gray coat, thin hands. No cart, no movement. Just staring. She felt it before she turned. That pressure behind the eyes. The knowing. And when their gazes met, he smiled, not with lips, with recognition. She left without buying anything. The next day, a woman on the bus, sat 3 rows ahead, but angled her body toward Ines the entire ride, never blinked, and when Ines finally stood to leave, the woman mouthed a sentence. 3 words. We saw you. She didn't sleep that night, but the next morning, her eyes were bloodshot, like someone else had jammed through her sockets. She found a note slipped under her door. No envelope, no handwriting, just typed, "We don't follow you. We return when you remember us." She spent the day going through every funeral she remembered. Not hers, others. The real ones. The ones she attended as a child, a teen, a woman. And in every memory, there was always someone standing alone. In the back, hands clasped, eyes still, never speaking, never touched. She pulled out an old photo album again, flipped to her aunt's funeral, and there, barely visible in frame, the same man from the pharmacy, 15 years ago, Unaged, unmoved. She traced his outline with her thumb, the paper burned, lightly, but enough to raise a scent she hadn't smelled in years. Formalin and forgotten violets. She started seeing them everywhere, at the library, in reflections. In dreams she wasn't having any more, but someone was. They didn't chase her. They didn't speak. They simply appeared and looked. One night, she found one of them waiting at the end of her street. A girl, maybe 9 years old, barefoot, hair dripping wet, like she'd been pulled from a river. She pointed at Ines, then whispered, "It was never your funeral. It was your reading." Ines fell to her knees, not from fear, from understanding, because suddenly she remembered she'd seen them all once before, at the first funeral, when she was a child, and the casket hadn't been hers. It had been empty, waiting. Episode 9, my death was staged. The truth didn't come in a scream. It came in a seam, along the lining of a dusty funeral curtain, where someone had tucked a note, delicate, yellowed, creased so many times it had learned how to stay closed. She found it while hiding, not from people, from the watchers, from the way mirrors no longer showed her entirely, from her own reflection, which had begun to blink slightly out of sync. She read the note beneath the emergency exit light of the chapel's back hall, typed, like everything in St. Verena Funeral Home. Performance scheduled, 3 a.m. Subject, I am. Role, sleeper. Audience, embedded only. Purpose, reset a collective memory field. She read it again, and again, but it never changed, even when she wanted it to. She returned to the room where she saw her own coffin once. It was smaller now, simpler, stripped of roses, stripped of meaning. A prop, painted wood, no base, no lock. Inside the coffin, a tape recorder, still warm, still spinning. She pressed play, and her voice spoke. I volunteer to be the silence. I accept the weight of the unspoken. Let the town forget me, but let my body remember enough to carry what they can't. She dropped it. The sound echoed, not because it hit the floor, but because the walls answered, with applause, distant, dead, delayed, like an audience that had rehearsed this reaction for generations. She searched the records. Not birth, not death, but production logs. Hidden in a box behind the embalming table. Stamped rehearsal files. Inside, photos, scripts, markings. Ines in a white dress. Eyes closed, a makeup artist standing over her. Notes in red pen. Her breathing must be slower. Frame her mother's tears from profile. Do not let her see the watchers until Act 3. She collapsed, not from grief, from betrayal, because she remembered it now, not the dream, the stage, the lights. The watchers in the back weren't mourners. They were verifiers, and she wasn't the dead girl. She was the vessel, a mask worn by silence, so memory could walk unnoticed through a funeral no one would ever claim. And worst of all, she had agreed to it. The curtain in the chapel lifted on its own. No one behind it. Just a mirror, full length, polished, clean, and on the glass, written in breath, "Scene change incoming." Episode 10. They made me a memory before I lived. The attic wasn't locked. It simply hadn't been opened in years. Dust didn't fall when she pulled the hatch. Ash did, as if something had burned long ago, but chose to stay. Inside, silence. And trunks. So many trunks. All identical. Each one marked with a single initial. MH. CT. Yes, I am. She opened hers last. Not from fear. From instinct. Like the body remembered the rhythm of a zipper. Before the mind could catch up. Inside. A dress. Lace. White. Same one from her first dream. A locket. Still ticking. But there was no photo inside. Only a name etched into the gold. Property of the town. And beneath it, a document. Stamped. Filed. Sealed. Then torn open. Not birth certificate. Not death. A transfer. From one ledger to another. Subject, I am. Function. Containment of emotional residues group. Forgotten 17. Active memory load. 83.9%. Projection. Unstable after iteration number 7. She backed away. Slid down the attic wall. Her breath wasn't shallow. It wasn't hers. It belonged to the last girl who wore this name and was buried beneath the school library, so her nightmares wouldn't spread to the other students. That's what the document said. In the case note section, Ines is not a soul. She is a script written in grief ink. Each reappearance restores stability to community narrative. Burn after mourning. She screamed into her hands, but the sound didn't echo, because the attic wasn't empty. It was full of other trunks, other dresses, other girls with borrowed names, some smiling, some headless, all frozen mid-sentence. She stood, tore the locket off, threw it into the dark, but something caught it. A hand, too thin, too still, from one of the trunks behind her, and a voice whispered, "You wear the grief so well. They almost believed you were a girl." She ran, down the stairs, out of the funeral home, into the street. But no one looked, because no one remembered what was missing. Only that something felt lighter. That night, she looked in the mirror again. Still no reflection. But a sentence began writing itself across the glass. "You were not born. You were remembered." Episode 11. I never woke up that night. There was always one night she couldn't quite recall. Not the day before. Not the morning after. Just that night. A space and time where the hours felt stretched. Like elastic pulled so tight it stopped being time at all. She found the clue in her sleep journal. Page after page of scribbled dreams. Coffins. Ash. Mirrors. And then a blank page, followed by a new entry in perfect penmanship. You were most believable when you didn't know you were performing. She didn't remember writing that. The ink was hers, but the tone was colder, wiser, like someone had lived longer inside her than she had. She retraced her steps, back to that night, the one her mother never mentioned, the one Clara always paused before saying, "You were tired, I think." She found the outfit she wore that day, still folded, still clean, no signs of sleep, nowhere, as if it hadn't ever touched a bed, as if she never got in one. At the edge of town was an abandoned hotel, not haunted, not famous, just left behind like someone meant to return, and never did. Room 313. She didn't know why, but she knocked. Once, twice, and the door creaked open. Inside, a bed, unmade, a nightstand, with an alarm clock blinking 3:17 a.m., and a note, just one line, "You haven't woken up yet." Her knees buckled. She stared at the bed. There were no sheets, just plastic and straps, like someone had prepped the body for sleep deeper than rest. And then she saw herself in the mirror across the room, not standing, lying, still, eyes closed, breathing, but not like a dreamer, like someone suspended between two endings. She turned around. She was still standing, still awake, but her body was already there, already dreaming, already looped. The phone rang. She picked up. No dial tone, just breathing. Then a voice. Her voice, but older, more tired. You agreed to stay asleep so they wouldn't have to grieve again. But every time you question it, the cracks get wider, and I can't hold both sides much longer. She dropped the phone. The lights flickered, and outside the window, a funeral procession, but walking backwards, carrying a coffin up a hill, toward a grave that never opened. She looked in the mirror again, and this time, the version of her lying on the bed opened its eyes and smiled. Episode 12, The Funeral That Never Ends. It began to repeat, not the dream, the funeral. Every night, a new version. Same chapel, same coffin, different her. The Ines in the box wore a red dress one night, a hospital gown the next, a wedding veil the night after. Each time, the mourners changed too. Sometimes dozens, sometimes none, sometimes just one, the child who called her mom. Watching her body being lowered like he'd seen it too many times to cry about it anymore. And Ines, she watched it all from the walls, not standing, hanging, like a portrait no one had ever painted, but everyone assumed belonged there. At first, she screamed, then she whispered, then she just listened, because somewhere in the pattern, a truth was trying to speak, but only in pieces. She started keeping count. 12 funerals, 12 bodies, all her, but none of them shared the same scar, the same smile, the same eyes, and she began to wonder which one had actually lived, if any. One night, she dared to ask the priest. He didn't answer, because his mouth was stitched shut, but he handed her a card, plain, yellowing, with one sentence. The grief must stay fresh. That's how the memory feeds. The next day, she looked in the mirror. Her reflection blinked out of rhythm again. This time, her eyes were wrong. A lighter brown. A mole under one she didn't have yesterday. "You're not me," she whispered, and the mirror smiled. "I was last week." She smashed it. Glass rained like applause. And behind the broken pane, a photo of her on her own funeral day, holding a candle, smiling, but the caption read, "Ines M., Day 14, retention successful." She tore through the funeral archives and found them, rows of files. Ines M. 001, Ines M. 002, Ines M. 003, 014 stable. Pending reset, Ines M. 015 current subject, each with dates. None matched any known year, because they weren't measured in years. They were measured in iterations. She ran into the street, but the town was empty. Or maybe it was still preparing the next audience. That night, she stayed awake. But still, the bell rang, the candles lit, and someone began walking toward her window with a veil in their hand, not to mourn her, to dress her. Episode 13, she wasn't buried. She was stored. She followed the dust. Not metaphorical. Real, thick, pale gray, trailing under a hidden door behind an embalming room, where no map reached, and no mourner ever stepped. The key wasn't metal. It was her breath. When she whispered, "Am I still mine?" the door clicked and opened. The stairs spiraled down like memory. Tight, circular, endless. And at the bottom, silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that's been listening. It wasn't a room. It was a vault. Rows of drawers. Identical. Cold. Labeled not by names, but by emotions. Despair 7A. Denial 9C. Hope corrupted 12D. Ines M. Load composite. She opened hers. Inside, nothing. At first. Then light flickered, and a voice echoed, hollow and personal. "You were never meant to process pain, only to preserve it." The drawer itself began to slide deeper, into the wall, through it, beyond. until it opened onto a hidden chamber. Inside, a bed, a mirror, and dozens of shells. Not coffins, casings, molds, some half-filled, some collapsed like memory foam, never allowed to forget, and in the center, a version of her. Still, eyes open, watching, waiting. "What is this?" she whispered, and her own voice answered back from the walls. "A library of sorrow. And you are one of the special editions." A figure emerged from the far corner, wearing black gloves, face covered. They carried a clipboard, spoke with no lips. This version exceeded retention capacity. "We'll shelve her for reabsorption. Thank you for carrying what the town refused to grieve." Ines tried to run, but her feet didn't move, because they weren't hers anymore. They were part of the chamber, anchored, like a file trying to delete itself while still being read. She screamed, and somewhere, in another version of the town above, a mother suddenly broke down for no reason. A widow stopped mid-laugh and wept. A child woke from a nightmare and whispered, "She's full now." The figure reached toward Ines's temple, pressed a finger to her skin, and her thoughts collapsed like ash sculptures in rain. In her final moment of clarity, she whispered, "Don't bury me. Tell them I was stored." And from the walls, 100 voices answered in unison, "We never bury what we still need." Episode 14, the room they use when the grief is too heavy. There is no name on the door, just a weight, an atmosphere so dense that light slows as it enters, and breath forgets how to exit. They only open a room when they must, when the town bends from collective sorrow. A car crash, a miscarriage, a boy who never came home from the woods. When too many people try to cry at once, and there's nowhere to put it, that's when they bring her out, or what's left of her. Not a body, not quite a ghost, a container, a volume of memory, bound in flesh and forgetting. Ines, or whoever wears her shape now. She doesn't speak. Speech would fracture the walls. But she listens, she receives, and the town pours itself into her. They kneel before the bed in the center of the room. Mothers, children, men who never believed in God, but still understand the need for a place to kneel. They don't say prayers. They say what they can't say anywhere else. Their regrets, their half-formed apologies, their wishes to undo what cannot be undone. And as they speak, she absorbs it. Her skin begins to gray. Veins pulse darker. The air thickens with words that no one wants to own. But she holds them, one by one. And when the grief becomes too heavy for her frame, the room folds. Literally, walls bend, corners curl inward. The ceiling lowers like a breath being held in suspense. And then, silence. No one knows what happens in those folded moments. Only that when the room opens again, the weight is gone, the grief is quiet, and she sleeps. Sometimes they try to thank her. They leave flowers, notes. One girl left a photo of her father with the words, "You screamed his name, so I didn't have to." But Ines never sees them, because she's not supposed to receive, only to carry. In the center of the wall is a plaque, polished every week by hands that pretend they don't tremble. It reads, "This is a room for grief too heavy to be human. Do not speak her name unless you're ready to forget it." And under the bed, a drawer, unmarked, cold, never opened. Inside, a locket, a button, a piece of red string, and a name etched into wax like it once belonged to someone real. I am active. Episode 15. The girl who dreamed a funeral rite. She didn't mean to fall asleep. Not this time. She wasn't pulled, wasn't summoned, didn't step into a memory that wasn't hers. She simply closed her eyes, and it began. No fog, no watchers, no mirror coffins or reverse bells. Just a field, and a chair, and her. She stood next to the casket. Same as always, but something was different. The air didn't hold its breath. The grass bent when she walked. The sun didn't flicker. It stayed. She approached slowly, fingers grazing the wood. No polish, No symbols. Just a name carved by something that knew how not to forget. Ines M. Nothing more. Nothing less. She opened the lid. Inside herself. But not pale. Not posed. Not dreaming. Just resting. Like someone who had finally been allowed to stop. The body didn't twitch. Didn't breathe. Because this time, it was right. The scar was in the right place. The dress, not white or black, but the color of dust after rain. And her eyes? Closed. Naturally, she sat in the chair beside the casket, waited, and slowly, people came. Not actors, not fragments, not projections of grief. Real, Clara, her mother, even the boy from her dreams. Older now, with eyes that knew how to cry. No one spoke. They didn't need to, because this wasn't performance. This wasn't storage. This was goodbye. One by one, they stepped forward, not to touch, but to look. And she, Ines, the one who had watched 100 funerals from behind the veil, now watched her own for the first time, and understood it. A priest stepped forward. Same robes, different eyes. He opened a small book, then closed it. No words, he said. She's already heard too many. And then it rained. Not hard, just enough to blur the outlines, to wash away the extra layers, the versions, the rehearsals, until only one remained. Ines stood, looked at her hands, still hers, but lighter, like someone had unhooked the weights. That tied her to other people's silence. She turned to the casket one last time, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you for holding me," until I was ready to hold myself. The wind lifted, the chair vanished, and the sky, finally, closed